Hello and welcome to another video where we're going to learn together the core concepts of Microsoft Teams application development. This video is going to be your complete guide to know how you can start developing apps for Microsoft Teams. Let's jump in. How are you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great and I'm really excited. So many of our partners and customers are looking to build Teams applications and they don't even know where to start. So I'm hoping that this video can help them figure out what it is that they would be building and where to start.
Exactly. And what if they already have something that they've built that they can bring into Teams? That's also something we're going to look into, right?
It's true. A lot of our documentation assumes you're starting from scratch. And while that's certainly an important use case, a lot of our ISV friends out there, they've already invested in a big application. They're not going to start over again. So we'll cover that too.
Exactly. Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, I thought I would show a quick demo that even maybe some people haven't even seen Microsoft Teams. So I thought I would start with a quick demo that shows even Teams out of the box very briefly, and then all the different places where an application could run and how that could help users in their daily life.
Cool. Let's see it.
So we're going to start with a consulting company called Datum, and just sort of a day in the life of how they would use Microsoft Teams. So our story opens where I've gotten an email from Tony Smith, who is one of our sales representatives. He has some really good news that we just won a big deal. We won the Contoso deal, which is great, except for he just sticks it in at the end that, we agreed we'd start on Monday. What? Like we don't even have like the lead, for this project hired yet. So that puts me in a bit of a predicament. Also, it'd be nice if Tony would use Teams because it's really better than email. So we'll see if we can get him to start using Teams.
Classic
so here's
Tony.
Microsoft Teams, and you can see I actually have an app pinned here at the top, which is the Get Started app.
And
then, it's just some other things. There's my activity feed. This is where I go in the morning just to see what is waiting for my attention. So anything that requires attention, kind of those alerts all build up here. I've got a chat place where I can have chats with people or bots throughout my organization, just informally. And then there are teams, which are more organized. They're topic-based. They have membership, and then there are channels underneath of there. You can see here the recruiting channel has a confidential channel and 2 public channels where we can work on our recruiting efforts together. There's also a calendar here. This is the same calendar that I use in Outlook inside of Microsoft 365, but I can just easily find it here just so I don't have to switch applications so much. I can make phone calls. Depending on the plan, they could be regular phone calls or just through Teams. And then I can get to recent files. Here's another app. This is a first-party app that comes with the product for shift management. So if a team of people are actually working in, say, a retail environment or manufacturing environment, they can actually swap off shifts and see what the schedule is right here.
Nice.
And then applications. So these are just some of the applications that are available inside of the app catalog, and we're going to get into that quite a bit later in the video. So I'm going to go to the recruiting channel. In the bad old days, I would have sent an email off to some unnamed alias and just prayed that I got a response. Now I can actually come in here and collaborate directly with everyone who's involved with recruiting. And you can see here Madeline is saying something in French, but fortunately there's a translation built in, which is kind of nice. So I'm just going to come in here and ask kind of desperately for help. So I'm going to mention the channel, which will kind of obnoxiously send everybody a notification. But I'm really kind of desperate here for a quick turnaround. And hopefully that will work. And now I noticed that Katie, who is the lead recruiter, she just responded, spoke to a great candidate today. That's great. But she wants a job description. Of course, it makes sense. So let me go for that. So right here inside of the recruiting channel, we have our documents. And one of the things is our job descriptions. So what I want is somebody a lot like this full stack developer. It's just going to be a slight difference on it. So I'm going to just save a copy of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
notice that I don't have to leave Teams to do any of this.
yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. So everything is inside Teams.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
files.
And I'm using actually a first party application is Microsoft Word, and I'm using that right inside of Teams. So now I can come in here and edit I take away the job code. That's for HR to insert. And I'm just going to add this one experience that I want, which is somebody who has some IoT experience. And now I'm going to open up the conversation panel and share this with the rest of the team. So in other words, yeah, I could be using the application and having a chat at the same time. So I'm just going to bring Katie in and see if she'll look at it. And hopefully she will. In fact, she is. And I can see that here she is literally co-authoring the document. So we're editing the doc at the same time as we're chatting about the doc. And she's going to go ahead and fill in that job code, which is great. So I think we're kind of like on the right track here. And again, this could be your app, right? You could have your app also, with the chat alongside. That's just always available. And it looks like Tony wants me now. Okay, well, at least he's in Teams. That's good. But it looks like they need React experience. Okay, so let me go back to the chat, to the team, and let Katie know that we need the React experience, because that's probably pretty important. And then we'll see. Yeah, okay, so Katie's calling the candidate. That's great. And, oh, Tony again.
Yes,
Okay,
Tony.
I know, right? Like, well, he closed a big deal. I'm not going to complain, but do they have a CV? He already wants the CV. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add Katie to this conversation. Now watch carefully what happens. Right now, it's me and Tony in a one-on-one chat. And you can see over on the left, it just says Tony Smith. Now, if I add Katie, we're going to end up with a new chat with the three of us inside of here. And now, next time Tony has a question, Katie will see it directly, right? And we can all work in here on this particular little recruiting effort.
Yeah.
And, oh, great. So Katie has a CV here for this candidate. And again, we can come in here and now it's similar to before because we're editing the document together. It's a first party app running with the chat alongside, except for this time it's a group chat. It's just Katie and Tony and myself. It's not the entire Teams channel. So that's something that I think Rabia is going to highlight later, is just sort of how do these different environments or different scopes work inside of Teams.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just kind of out of the box. What happens if we start adding an application in here as well? So I'm going to show an application, and we're going to introduce a few of the major capabilities: tabs, bots, and adaptive cards. Now I'm logged in as Katie, and I'm back in that Teams channel, or that team for recruiting. And you can see here that I have a hiring board tab. So this is great because I can see all the job openings and the candidates who are in the pipeline without leaving the team. So let me come here. I'm going to actually add a new tab. And this is kind of interesting. This is called a configuration page. So when you add a tab in a Teams channel, you get this configuration experience. Now, I know Rabia is going to, again, explain this a little bit more later, but a little foreshadowing. This is just an iframe, right? So where it says new talent app, and at the bottom where it says post to the channel, those are teams. Everything in between is something that the application developer wrote, and it's just running in an iframe. These configuration pages work for tabs and also for connectors and messaging extensions. And again, we'll get into all that terminology later, but just letting you know this is kind of a common pattern. And what we've done here, the app developer stripped away their navigation because you don't really want to navigate every time you go into the tab, right? I mean, part of the pain of switching apps is not just switching, but it's having to go look up certain information inside of the app when you go to use it. So we're going to just highlight this specific urgent hire right here. And then we're going to go into that and you can see it. So now other people can just click on this tab to see what's the urgent kind of hire of the day. And you can see that it also put a notification into the channel so that people can kind of be drawn in here. So that's what tabs are. The other big thing that is common in Teams applications is bots. So inside of a Teams channel, you have to mention the bot. Otherwise, the bot would get confused by all the conversation going on between the people in the team. And you can see here that it's actually showing me all of the active job postings. So I can click into one of these. Now what you're seeing is something richer than a typical text message that might come from a bot. Specifically, it's called an adaptive card, and that's something that we'll also cover a little bit later in this video. We can interact with those adaptive cards. We can display richer information using the adaptive cards. And now let's add another concept onto here. Remembering that tabs could be any web page, bots could be any Azure bot, and adaptive cards are just simple JSON structures. So now let's add something called a task module. A lot of new developers, a lot of new Teams developers miss this and don't realize there's something normally would be called a dialog box, but it's called a task module in Teams for historical reasons. And that also could be any web page or adaptive card. So let's see how that can be used to interact with one user at a time while we're in the middle of the group chat or the team environment. So Katie's going to say, all right, I want to create a new position. So she's got another job opening she needs to fill. And you can see that now this pops up and sort of allows her to interact directly without everybody else inside of that team having to see what she's doing until she's done, right? So she can fill in all the details of this job description and confirm it, and it will post the result right here inside the Teams channel. And now she can fill in a little bit of information and share the outcome with the rest of the team. Let me ask you to think for just a moment, how many emails did that just save? Instead of emailing Katie, having her enter the job, maybe having to go back and forth on it a couple of times, then she's going to actually have to email everybody telling them about the new opening. It all happened right here in plain sight of everybody in the team. So when I come back to check what's going on, I'm going to see this new job description without having it clutter up my inbox. All right, so that's a task module. The last thing that I want to show is, and again, that could be any web page or adaptive card. The last thing to show here is a messaging extension. So this is something that runs inside of the bot framework. It's really just a web service that could be hosted anywhere. And so let's take a look at what that would be like. So we just interviewed that candidate that Katie recommended, and we need to get feedback from the team. So instead of sending an email, she's going to post a feedback request right here. And what you're seeing here is while she's in the compose box where you would normally write a message, she's actually able to go and insert business data into there because the HR app has a connection into a messaging extension. So now here's the candidate. Can click that, and we're going to get this nice adaptive card with all the information about Donna and request to go ahead and fill in that feedback. Now watch what happens. This is back to me on my phone. I've just been working with a client, and all I have with me is my phone. So I'm going to come in to check on this, and I'll see that, again, I have my chat. I have everything that I would have had on my desktop. And here is that adaptive card. Now, in the old days, I might have had to drive back to the office to get on the corporate network to go to some line of business system to submit my feedback. Or maybe I have to go get my computer and connect to a VPN so that I can get in and update the feedback. Oh, and when I went in, by the way, to that HR app, I'd have to find the candidate again. I'd have to figure out which candidate it was. Now, I don't have to do any of that. I'm on my phone. All I have to do is I could schedule another interview, or just click leave a comment. And I'm just going to use the voice feature on my phone to do this and leave my little comment. I don't have to look up the candidate, switch apps, or anything. And I'll go ahead and submit that. And that's it. I'm done. I don't have to think about it. I can just get the task done right away. And here's the feedback. By the way, this is what an adaptive card looks like on your phone. So it works the same on a phone as it does on the desktop application. While I'm here, I'm actually going to go and bill the hours for the consulting meeting I just had. Again, I'll use the voice feature on the phone. And again, instead of having to go into the app and some other app and find the client, enter the data, I can just ask a bot what it is that I want, and it will translate with ridiculous accuracy 20 minutes into hours and confirm, and I can go ahead and it bills my time. So this is the way you can kind of streamline your work with Microsoft Teams apps.
All right, that's great, Bob. I mean, I have a question though. So you said tabs are iframes. Now, it's a task module, which is like a dialog box that popped up. Is that also an iframe that you can put in Teams?
Usually, yes, but you can also have an adaptive card, which I know you're going to discuss those a little bit later. You could put that inside of your pop-up, your dialog. But I think the most powerful method is to just use an iframe. And yeah, if you're basically anywhere in Teams that you're providing a visual user interface outside of the conversation, that's going to be an iframe. And the same SDKs and programming techniques will work in an adaptive card, in a tab, or in one of those configuration pages like I showed when I was setting up the tab.
Cool. So now we're going to talk about messaging extensions and a bit more about messaging extensions. There are two types of messaging extensions. One is a search-based one, and the other is an action-based one. So search-based is probably the most widely used, I would say, because it's so useful. If you've got external data that you want to plug right into Teams application, you can do that. You can perform a search, get that information, put that in a chat for you to share with your teammates. So we will show you demos on these as well.
Right,
Yes,
that's
Bob.
the one that I just showed, right? The one in the HR demo was a search-based, and I had a couple of search queries that I could do there.
Exactly. And if you look closely in that, you also can see multiple tabs. I think you had the search for candidates and also for positions, and they're like tabs. So you can have multiple tabs of different search categories, etc. It's pretty useful stuff. An action-based one is if you want to do something with that with a message, if you want to invoke like a task module and then put that information in a chat, to put more eyes into your message, etc., you would go for an action-based one. And there are a few areas that you probably need to be familiarized with, like you can see in this deck here. We've got the compose area, which is down below, where you actually type your message. You can see those tiny icons, especially like if you want to format the message, or if you want to put a nice GIF, you would go into that compose area where you can see icons. That's where you actually invoke your messaging extensions as well. So if you see the three dots there, you could just open up and find your app, which will be a messaging extension. There's also on your message, if you click on the ellipsis that is number 2 here, you can see there is more action. So this is another area where you can invoke your messaging extension, maybe to share this message into Teams, etc. And right on top, number 3 is where you could quickly go and find your messaging extension. If you're used other chat apps, you would be familiar with this, /todo or something like that. You could go ahead and invoke your messaging extension from the bar up there. So that's few things we wanted to discuss with messaging extension. And another thing that we didn't discuss here is the meeting apps. You could have applications show up, for example, tabs show up in a meeting. You could have people collaborate in a meeting as well. So there are three areas where you would put your applications while maybe before a meeting, you're preparing for a meeting, you've have all the attendees information, everything is set up. You could have like a tab where you could show some information. That's one area where you could utilize to put your application in when you're in a meeting. So if you're in a meeting with your teammates and you want to collaborate, maybe it's a sprint planning session or it's some sort of a project status meeting, you could bring up your app, you could bring up DevOps or any board or anything. You could work collaboratively with your team. That's another area where you can focus. So let me just share my screen. So if you can see here, they're actually called side panels, where you can show your app in a side panel. You could also show in a stage where you can collaborate with your teammates, and you could also bring up your side panel. And then you could also have your results, whatever, and maybe it's a voting, that you did during the meeting. You could have those results displayed after the meeting as well. So there are three different areas where you could plug in applications in your teams. And this is so beneficial, so useful, that in fact, I was just talking to my son about any app ideas, any meeting app ideas, because he was in a bunch of Teams meetings during lockdown. And he came up with this idea that he should be able to open up Minecraft from from his team meetings.
I know. I always want to play Minecraft during meetings. I don't know.
I know. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's not your business case, but you get the idea, right?
I think it's a great idea.
So that's another area that is coming in hot, meeting apps. And there are a few samples as well that we will share towards the end of this session. Now that we've seen all the capabilities that you can build in Microsoft Teams applications, maybe now we need to deep dive and understand where Microsoft Teams applications sit in Microsoft 365 space.
Let's start by just looking at the Teams architecture itself, and I think that will probably help, and then maybe we can dig into the app aspect of it. So as you'll see, here's the Microsoft Teams architecture, and along the top we have the client, which I'll talk about more in just a second. And in the bottom, you'll see that the services include not only Teams-specific services and some services for communication that are actually originated with Skype for Business, but there are other services here like SharePoint, OneDrive. We saw Word, OneNote, Exchange for emails, right? So your files live in SharePoint on OneDrive. All of these are more mature services that are part of Microsoft 365. They support a number of compliance and security features that our customers need. So by building Teams on top of those, we actually are able to provide the security and compliance features without having to reinvent all of that. Now and your app is going to live there with all those services, right? Where it says your services here, and Rabia is going to get into that in just a minute. Just to talk quickly about the Teams client architecture. Currently, the desktop application in Windows, Mac, and Linux, I should add Linux to the slide. It's an Electron app, which means that there's common code between that and the web browser-based Teams. And then there are native applications for Apple and Android. So just so that you probably want to think about testing in the three major clients, somewhere in the desktop, and then something on an iPhone or an iPad, and then something on Android, just to make sure that you're kind of testing everything. Otherwise, there aren't huge differences between mobile and desktop. Obviously, any tabs or any user interface that you build, you want that to be responsive so that it will look good on different screen sizes. One final concept that I want to highlight is the idea of Microsoft 365 groups. So before we even had Teams, we had something called Office 365 groups, which has now been renamed Microsoft 365 groups. The idea here is that if a group of people are working together, they're going to need access to a set of files, to a calendar, to some streaming videos, to some notes, and all these different icons are just the different applications. Rather than having to one by one give permission, with a Microsoft 365 group, you can actually give permission to all of those underlying assets in one membership service. So if Rabia joins the team, we add her to the Microsoft 365 group. She gets access to the SharePoint files, the calendar in Outlook, the videos in Stream, the reports in Power BI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then if she leaves the group, I don't need to remember to clean all those things up. I just remove her from the Microsoft 365 group and I'm done. So Teams is built on this. In fact, every team has a Microsoft 365 group underneath of it. And so when you add a member to a team, you're actually adding them to a Microsoft 365 group. This even goes to the point where the ID that identifies an M365 group and the team ID are the same number. They're the same globally unique ID. So the advantage of this is that if you are building an app that's going to run in a team rather than in a one-on-one or group chat, you can rely on the fact that there's a SharePoint site there where you could put files and that the users of that team have permission to that SharePoint site. The same thing would be true for an Outlook calendar or any of these other workloads. So that's just kind of a good thing to keep in mind about Teams itself when you're building an app.
Where does all this data go? Where is all this data coming from? Where's all this data going in? This is a question that keeps coming up. So do you want to put some light into this? Where do Teams application data live?
Absolutely. Well, the answer is actually on this slide, which I grabbed from my friend Rob Gates. It's he had to pull this together from a lot of different sources. Short term, the data lands in places like Cosmos DB for messages and other locations in Azure. In the long term, all that data is ultimately pushed either into Exchange or SharePoint or OneDrive, and SharePoint and OneDrive are kind of the same product with different front ends. So the reason for that is for compliance reasons. If you wanted to do retention schedules, if you wanted to do e-discovery, things like that, those are supported there. The thing is, even though we're showing this to you, you shouldn't really know this. You should really use the Microsoft Graph because this is kind of internals of Microsoft Teams and it might change over time. So really the best bet is to use the Microsoft Graph. Now, one thing that you probably do need to understand though is about files in particular. Files, this probably won't change over time. And you can still use the Microsoft Graph API to get to this, but it is useful to understand where files are stored. If you're inside of a Microsoft Teams team, then your files are going to land in the SharePoint site that is underlying that team. So you remember there's always a Microsoft 365 group for each team. There's always a SharePoint site for each M365 group. And your files are going to be organized by channel into folders within the document library of that site. So if you just are trying to navigate where things are, this could be helpful. If you're in a one-on-one or a group chat, then the files land in the sender's OneDrive. So if I send a file to Rabia in a one-on-one chat, it goes in my OneDrive in a special folder called Teams Chat Files, and it's going to set the permissions to include Rabia automatically so that she can see the file.
So this is about Microsoft 365 data. So what if I've got some data that I'm storing in my application? So is that data in Teams or is that app data somewhere else?
It's somewhere else. It's wherever your app wants to put it, right? Your app might use some database. It might use some backend system. And it's really up to you as a developer to decide where you want to store that data. And a lot of the apps that have come from our ISV partners, they already had put the data somewhere, and who knows, it might be in Amazon, it might be in Azure, it might be on premises, and it's really not our business, it's their business, right? Because it's their app.
Yeah.
So, Azure's we'd love it if you put it in Azure, but you don't have to. So Rabia, perhaps now you could take us a step further down the rabbit hole and actually get into how the Teams app fits into all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of a overview of what we just talked about. You can have tabs, they're iframes, hosted anywhere. Okay, they should be up in the cloud somewhere that is easily browsable from the internet. So we have got bots, web services that uses Azure Bot Framework. Messaging extension, they're web services. Again, they use bot framework again to communicate with your web service and Microsoft Teams. Connectors, notifying channels. If you already have webhooks that you've developed, you could easily make a connector out of it. Adaptive cards, like Bob mentioned earlier, they are just interactive cards or rich UI that you can put into Teams application. It's just a simple JSON file. An activity feed. I think this one also we showed earlier. Bob showed in the demo, where you could see all your notifications that you need to get on top. So you could also program and develop stuff that could invoke a notification there in the activity feed. These are the things that you can develop right now. And mind you, these things are all hosted somewhere else. It does not live in Microsoft Teams. It is surfaced in Microsoft Teams using something called a app package. And this app package basically consists of 3 files. 2 icons, with basically just helping, identifying the application, and 1 manifest file, which is, again, a JSON file. It's like a file that holds everything together. So if you've got a tab, it will tell Microsoft Teams that, hey, this application actually points to this URL that is probably online somewhere. Or if it's a bot, it would say, hey, use this bot ID and invoke and connect with this web service, things like that. So this is basically what happens. So when you say developing Teams application, it's not like you develop something where it lives inside Teams. It's like you develop an application that is already out there somewhere online, and you're just going to surface that into Microsoft Teams.
That's great. And the manifest is going to tell Teams where to find the app.
That's right. And you know what? It's always good to show something than just talk about it. So I'm just going to open up the manifest file of the HR app that we saw, because it's perfect, right? So because we already saw the capabilities that app can provide, I can just go in and deep dive and show and dissect and show you, where each of those capabilities live. So this is basically, I'm just gonna make it a bit bigger. So this is basically the manifest file. Like I said, it's a JSON file, which will it actually consists of, in the beginning, it will consist of the name of the app, the developer name, the privacy URL, terms URL, etc. It's basically names and description and stuff like that. Then you see something called configurable tabs. Now these are tabs, so it's configurable in the sense that it has settings, so you can put settings in and configure that tab to act a certain way. Maybe it's just a title name, or maybe it's some sort of a query string that you want to pass. So this configurable tab, if you can see here, it points to a URL that is somewhere hosted in Azure websites. Like it is probably a static web app or something. And this is where you tell Microsoft Teams that, okay, this app actually points to this tab. And you can see here scopes, which we will again come into in our next discussion. That is Teams scopes. That's something that we all need to know. So we've got these scopes as well for this capability. And static tabs.
So I guess
now,
just to point out that that the configurable tabs can only run in a team or a group chat, and static tabs can only run in personal. So it's kind of a limitation there, I guess.
Exactly. So. Yeah, that's right. So static tabs basically are like personal, like Bob mentioned, there are personal tabs that would be there for each user. So it's basically for users. So if as a user, you're logged in and you want to see maybe a list of my tasks for today, or my most important emails, or something like that. You've developed an app that actually shows personalized information for that particular user. Then you would put that in the static tabs. And configurable tabs are basically, like Bob mentioned, it's something in the team, a team project status report, or some sort of a dashboard in your team. So these two are tabs. And this is how you configure them. I mean, you mentioned them in the manifest file. You can see here content URL is where it points your tab information, where it brings out that information and put that as an iframe inside Microsoft Teams. Now, coming to the next capability, it's bots. So I've already configured for this particular app, we've already configured the bot in Azure bot framework. So we've got registered bot here. We provide the bot ID. These are the command lists. Like if you've noticed, if you want to type something and get, it would actually surface when you go in and mention the bot. It will show you, what do you want me to do with this bot? Maybe you want candidate details, maybe you want positions, maybe you want a bit of a help there. All these things you would provide here. And then there are connectors. So if you've got a connector to notify your channel on a new position that opened up in the HR system, then I would probably go ahead and configure my connector and then provide the configuration URL, which is basically my webhook URL into this section. So as you can see now, maybe you're getting the idea. All these things are pointing to things. They're like pointers. So for each capability, there is a specific property that you can fill in, so and so. And compose extension, well, no points in guessing. It is for a messaging extension. You can see search-based one, and you can also see action-based one if you have. Search-based one, it would have something like a type query. And if it's a type action, then it would be an action-based messaging extension. So these are where you can go ahead and configure and tell Microsoft Teams that, hey, I've got messaging extension that does this. And in the backend, of course, there is bot code running. For that, you need the bot framework. Yep, so this is basically an overview of how your manifest file will look like, which basically that holds everything together for your application in Microsoft Teams.
That's great. It's great to understand. And I can see here there's even a valid domain section there at the end.
Yeah.
So do you have to have all of the websites in there that you're going to use in the app?
Yep, absolutely. So if you've got domains that you want to, let Microsoft Teams surface in Teams, then you definitely have to put it here for security reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's great.
Cool. Next up, we're going to discuss about scopes that we quickly saw in the manifest file, which is also a pretty important topic. So Teams application scopes can be divided into three. The first one being the team scope, which basically is when your application is in a Teams channel. Say, for example, you've got a HR recruiting channel where recruiters discuss about new positions or new candidates, then you probably would have your application. If you have got a tab that displays, the whole information, then you would have that in a Teams scope because you want to put that in a Teams channel. Now, group conversations or meeting ones are basically when you have one-on-one chat, or you have, when we saw the demo, we saw that Tony and another recruiter and yourself were in a conversation, right? 3 people in one conversation. They're called group conversations. You can all, if you want to add some application into that kind of a conversation or a one-on-one chat, then you probably will scope your application as, for group conversation. You also have the third one, which is the personal scope. Personal scope is when you want to have your applications only for that particular logged in user. For example, the example that I mentioned before, you want to see something that I did, my task. My Personal Hub, things like that, then you would basically go for a personal scoped app. So these are the three scopes you have to keep in mind when you're building applications so that your app can adjust accordingly in different contexts. And if you've noticed these little icons that we've put in here, you can see that connectors are teams based. So they are always in a team scope because you're basically notifying a channel.
Exactly. So, Rabia, something I've been asked a lot by our partners is what are the software development kits and APIs that you would use as developing a team? I mean, I get that your Teams app is running in a web page somewhere, or it's running in a web service, implementing a bot. But when it needs to do things, there are just so many SDKs in Microsoft 365 that it's really easy to get confused.
That's a great point, Bob. And yes, honestly, if you have got tabs, or if you've got some web app that's online, or if you've got a meeting app, then you would use Teams JS SDK. But if you have got a bot or messaging extension, they would use the Azure Bot Framework SDK. So these are the two things I would say development-wise you invest in an SDK for, based on each applications. Now, your applications, like I mentioned, tabs, bots, messaging extensions, whatever it is, if you want to leverage all the services in Microsoft 365 and get the data, or do actions on them, then you would use Microsoft Graph, which is basically a single entry API that you would use to access all these different workloads in Microsoft 365. So that's one area you would, that is one API that you would use in your application if you want to, use the services in Microsoft 365 or the data. And for authentication purposes and for identity related, then you would go for Azure Active Directory. So these are the different, technical investments that you would do for your application based on what you want to build, what capability you want to build, and what kind of data you want to use in your application.
So, Rabia, we've seen adaptive cards in the demo, and I'm wondering if you can explain how they kind of work to everyone.
Sure. So if you've used, any action cards from Outlook, or if you've used a bot, basically a card in your Teams where you've done some action, approved something, etc., then you probably have used adaptive cards. And I also like this example where, if for Windows users, if you've seen your notification pop up about some updates happening or some email that you need to reply to, etc., that's an adaptive card. They're basically made to enable you to take actions right from your applications, cross-platform, cross-app, snippets of UI. It's really rich, and it also takes the form of the host that it is in. So if it's an Outlook, it will look like an Outlook application, Outlook card. In Teams, it would look like a Teams card. Basically, it's just an amazing piece of discovery, I would say. So if you can go to adaptivecards.io, you can see a whole lot of information about what an adaptive card is. And when you're creating Teams application, you might want to consider, changing your UI, or if you want to pull in more eyes into your messages or your cards or your forms, then adaptive cards is your best friend. So you can go to this link here, adaptivecards.io, and you can see a whole bunch of documentation on why and how useful adaptive cards are. You could also, this is my favorite. So Designer is another tab in this website where you could go ahead and design adaptive cards. They're like what Bob mentioned, snippets of JSON that you can go ahead and design with a bunch of elements that you have on your left side. So one of the card looks like this. If you want to put some nice looking UI into your application, you can do so. And there are so many samples. That is the best thing about this, is that you've got samples for you to go ahead and copy and improvise and use in your application. I really like the list of samples that they've provided. And this is the Schema Explorer. So if you want to know more about what you need to put inside that JSON, then you could go ahead and refer to this schema as well. So yeah, adaptive cards are super usable, actionable cards that you can use in your application, especially with Teams. All right, so we've seen the app capabilities, we've talked about scopes, we've talked about the SDKs that we need to build a Teams app. Now, Bob, I have a question. What if I don't have any of these things? I have my web service or I have my tab. How would I create an app using a UI?
Well, this is something that's kind of in the process of changing. So let me show you the way it looks now at the time of this filming. And then we can kind of get into where it's sort of going over time. So right now there's something called App Studio. And this has a manifest editor in it. So if we look at that same HR app inside of App Studio, it's the same as the manifest JSON file that you just showed. It's just that it's giving me kind of a little form to fill out and making the whole thing a little bit easier. So this is something that I think a lot of existing Teams developers are familiar with. One of the things that I will typically do is come in here and actually download the app manifest and check it into source control so that my teammates can access it, right? Because a lot of times you don't really want to do this. This is great for one-off use, but if you're building an app for distribution, you're probably going to want to have the manifest in your source control system along with the code that uses it. Now, this App Studio thing is going away, and it will be replaced by something called the Teams Developer Portal. It's currently in preview, so we may end up redoing this video or part of it when this comes out. We'll see how that goes. But for the time being, this is the same sort of thing as App Studio. It's just that it's browser-based. And again, I can come in here and hopefully find that app. Here it is. And it's the same sort of thing. This has more help for store validation, and that'll be other videos and things like that. But basically, again, it's the same sort of thing where at the end, I can publish my app within my organization. I can publish it to the store and submit it for the store, or I can just download the app package and then go ahead and put that into source control or however I want to manage that. It's just like you showed, it's just a zip file with two icons and a manifest.json file. And this is just a convenience. There are other tools like Power Apps will generate an app manifest for you. So there's some tools that will generate it for you as well. Now, if I go back into Teams, you'll see here under Apps, this is what users would see when they come in if they want to install an app. And built for your org, these are ones that have been installed into our tenant, whereas all these others are actually in the App Store. And again, we'll be covering in other videos how to get your app into the App Store if you so desire. If I want to upload a custom app, I can either do this for me or my teams. This requires an administrative policy, which I'll show in just a sec. So this is turned off by default. If you want people to be able to upload directly and use an app without putting it in any catalog, you need to enable that policy. Or because I'm a tenant admin, I can upload an app for my whole org. And then, right, or I could submit this to the app catalog, which would actually run it through an approval workflow where an administrator could then add it to the organizational catalog. So maybe I want to, maybe I've written an app and I'm in one of the free developer tenants that anyone can get. And I built the app. Now I want to deploy it in my company's tenant. Maybe I would submit that there. So there's a lot of different ways to get your app on this list so that people can install it and use it. Let me show you what the administrator would see. So here I am looking at the Teams admin center, and you can see here that I can manage apps. I could upload the apps into my enterprise catalog right here if I want to. This is also where if somebody submitted an app, where I would see that there was apps pending approval, and I could decide whether or not to allow those to go into the catalog. So here's that same app that we looked at before, and you can see that I can set permissions and get a little bit of information about the app from right here inside of the admin center. Permission policies are where you actually decide who has permission to use which apps. So I just have the org-wide policy here, but I could set up different policies. Maybe everybody in a certain job role has a certain app and nobody else does. So I could put those people inside of a policy and then just allow those users to have access to those apps. Each policy allows you to allow all the apps, allow specific apps and block all the others, or flip that, block all specific apps and allow all the others, or just block all the apps. So this is available, these choices are available for Microsoft apps, for third-party apps, enterprise apps. So you can really control that. And you should be aware, if you're writing an app, that administrators can actually control who can see your app or whether they're allowed to use your app. So you want to be nice to the administrators for sure. Now, here's setup policies. This is where you can, first of all, turn on and off who can upload custom apps, who can pin apps onto the navigation, and then I can proactively install apps for the users. So maybe I want to push an app out to all the HR personnel or out to all the frontline workers or what have you, right? I could do that, and then the user doesn't have to figure out how to install an app. It's automatically installed. And you can even go a step further and pin the apps proactively for those users. So remember I had that Get Started app and I had the Shifts app in my earlier demo? Well, that's because they were pinned here inside of these policies. Another way that you can proactively publish apps or install them for people is to build them into a team template. So this is something you might want to encourage administrators to do if your app is designed to work inside of a certain type of team. Let me show you how this works. So I'm going to come in here and add a new team template. And let's just go ahead and make this a staffing team. So this is something that anytime we're hiring, we're going to use one of these. And I give it a description and a locale and all these kind of details. And I'm going to add a channel automatically called Interview Tips. And this will show up anytime anybody creates a staffing team. And then I can also go ahead and edit this channel and add an app inside of the general channel of every one of those teams. So now the new talent app is going to be automatically provisioned whenever anybody creates a staffing team. So again, the nice thing is, right, a lot of users are not going to think about using an app at all. But if you can set up one of these team templates, they don't have to think about it. So there's my staffing team. I'm just creating a new one. It comes with 2 channels and 1 app. I'll make it private, which just means that it's not going to be discoverable by people who aren't proactively added to the team. And then when it creates the team, after a little bit of time, and I can add my members in there. Let's add Tony and Katie.
Tony
right?
again.
Yeah, well, you can't, Tony, you got to be nice to him. He brings in a lot of business. We really like him. So, and then anyway, here's the new talent app. Right inside here, we can set. You remember that configuration experience that I showed earlier?
Yeah.
Right. It's the same app, same code, but I didn't have to install it. It was done just by creating a staffing project.
This is brilliant.
So Rabia, I know when people go to look at the Teams documentation, a lot of times they're going to see instructions that say that they should run something called Yo Teams, which is a Yeoman generator, or something called the Teams Toolkit. And so could you explain a little bit about the difference between those and whether they're really necessary, especially for people who have already an existing app?
I'm glad you asked. This is a hot topic, right? So we've got 2 code generators right now in the documentation. We've got Yeoman generator, which is a CLI-based generator, which scaffolds out project for Teams applications for you. And it was probably the first generator we had. So it's a community-built one. It's amazing. It actually scaffolds React apps. It has many capabilities that it can scaffold. Then we have the Microsoft-owned code generator, which is called Teams Toolkit. So Teams Toolkit, it's a extension in VS Code and Visual Studio that you can install. It's pretty simple to install, and you can just get started. It's like a wizard that would run, and then you could create an app. I think it also has a CLI side to it, where you could just run commands and create applications. But the thing is, you could also have an application that you already have up and running somewhere, like we mentioned, hosted somewhere, that you could bring into Teams, right? So for that, you don't need a code generator because you already have your application.
This is really all about leveraging what you've already built. If you have a web page or a single page app, maybe that could become a Teams tab with some slight modifications. If you have webhooks, the ability to send and receive webhooks, you could use connectors or outgoing webhooks or incoming webhooks. We haven't gotten into that yet, but we'll talk about that in a future video. If you have a bot that runs in the Azure bot framework, then you could reuse that in your Teams app, whether it was written with code or with Bot Framework Composer, Power Virtual Agents. They can all work inside of Teams. If you have a web service that looks up some information, maybe you could adapt that in with the bot framework into a messaging extension to allow querying that information. So the point here is that Teams is actually designed to support what you've already built. You don't have to kind of start from scratch each time. So let me show you the simplest possible Teams app in a way. This is a team clock. I generated the scaffolding with Create React App, which is a Facebook generator. It doesn't matter what I used because I don't have to touch the code at all to make it run inside of Teams. The key is that it's running locally and that I have a manifest here that I've created for this with localhost :3000 as my URL. And then here's my static tab pointing to that code, and then I added localhost :3000 to valid domains. That's it. Now, if I wanted my tab to be configurable so that it could work in a Teams channel or group conversation, I would need to build a little configuration page. Normally, this could have a whole little form of data on it, but in this case, I don't really have anything special there. So if we take a look at the code, it's really simple. I'm using the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK here. On line 40, I'm saying that the form data, which there is nothing on the form, so I'm saying that the form data is valid. That will light up the save button. And then when somebody clicks that save button, the onSave handler that I am registering on line 22 is going to fire, and it's going to give me a chance to save the tab into Teams. On line 25, notify success, which closes the configuration page on line 31. And if there was a form in here, I would save away that configuration information in my own database, remembering the team ID, the channel ID, and the entity ID that I had set, which I can get back at any time from the Teams JavaScript SDK, so that I could match that up in my own database with the configuration info. And I'll point you to a sample here, which has such a configuration page set up for you to try.
All right, so this is my feedback bot. I'm invoking it, asking a question, how's the weather today? My teammates get to reply back in a nice little form. Adil replies, it's nice and sunny. I get to see that summary here. And let's see what Alex has to say. Alex says something really funny, and he posts it back to me. And I can see all the summary of all my teammates who responded to this feedback bot. So the code base we have here is generated using the bot builder generator, and we've got two files here, bot.ts and index.ts, basically the files that were scaffolded out We use EcoBot template. So you can see here in bot.ts, we have all the code needed for this functionality to work. I'm storing conversation data, I'm getting the responses, and based on user roles, whether it's an initiator or a person taking part in the feedback, I'm sending out adaptive cards. So this basically is a Teams bot that I've built. So you can go ahead and check it out. It's open source. We have a really cool app that we want to show. It's a bot. It's built by one of our colleague, Tomomi. And Bob, do you want to show the demo? Because I know you love cats.
Yeah, it's really simple, right? Like suppose I'm talking to my colleague Katie and I say, hey, Katie, I went to use your app, but now I could just say I got a 401 access denied, but that wouldn't be that much fun, right?
No.
So maybe I can get a cat to say it for me. So Tomomi Amura, our colleague, wrote this cool, she actually invented the HTTP status cats with a cool cat photo for every HTTP status code. So now I can say, well, I got a 401 unauthorized, right? And now she can see this poor cat is like trying to get into Kitty Mart and can't get
Access
in, right?
denied.
I know she's going to fix it right away, right? So just quickly, the code, right? So the code is really simple. And as you said, it's a bot, but it's a bot that's only going to be used for the purpose of that messaging extension. So you can see here, it's just an Express server, and it's going to bring in the bot builder SDK and bring in the bot code itself. It's going to create this thing called a bot framework adapter, which is the thing that communicates with the Azure bot service. And then it's going to make the HTTP cat bot and run that and listen on /API/messages. The bot itself is going to only really listen for these activities called Teams messaging extension query. When one of them comes in, it looks up the status code, and then it formats a little adaptive card, which is what you saw as the output, and it returns that and sends it back to Teams. So that's it.
Amazing. You could just replace that HTTP cat with HTTP dog for dog lovers.
Well, I guess you could. What would that be? I don't know. The cat lovers of the world might be upset.
Cool. That's really cool. So that's just few lines of code, maybe like less than 100 lines of code. You can get your app up and running, and you have your manifest that holds all this bot information, and that's it. You've got that application running in your Teams. So when you're building an application in Teams, there is a lot that you need to know, like, for example, what SDKs you want to use, where to start. It's always a bit confusing because you've got so many documentation, so many tips and tricks and everything out there in the internet. But we've framed up a small little table that could help you out, which we'll also put in the description for you to go ahead and look what you're going to build, or what do you have that you want to leverage and put in Teams application. Then this is probably where you need to start. This is what you probably need to know, etc. So Bob, do you want to walk through some of this very key important ones?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're building a tab, you're building a single page app. You can use any technology you want. You like Angular, you want Vue, you want to just build it on ES6 modules. You can do anything. I say React is easiest because there are more. Microsoft uses React a lot, and Teams is porting itself over to React and is more reactive. React all the time. And both EO Teams and the Teams Toolkit generate React code. So there's just a lot more examples and documentation around React, but you don't really need to use that. What you will need in the case of anything that has a browser-based iframe surface is you'll probably need the Teams JavaScript SDK just to talk to Teams from inside of the iframe. And Teams Framework is an SDK that layers on top of the Teams JavaScript SDK and makes it a lot easier to do authentication and some of the other tasks that you'll want to do. This is being introduced as part of the Teams toolkit and is still in preview at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're building a bot or a messaging extension, then the thing that you can mainly talk to is the Azure Bot Framework, and there's an SDK called the Bot Builder SDK. If you want to build adaptive cards, you're going to end up needing to understand how those work. Also, for bot builders, it's very convenient to have language understanding through Lewis, which is a cognitive service in Azure, Q&A Maker, which manages the knowledge base, and Bot Framework Composer is a really useful tool in building those bots.
It is. And there is a video series that Bob, you and Acha put together. Both of my lovely colleagues put together. So you can go to this link and learn all about Bot Framework Composer. It's really cool tool.
Cool. Yes, absolutely. And then the Graph API is the best way to access the rest of Microsoft 365 content and services. And then we have a couple of advanced scenario links here at the end. One is meeting apps, as mentioned earlier, and another one is Azure Communication Services, which allows you to build chat and video and audio interfaces between Teams and another application. So maybe you wanted to have a public-facing app that people can use outside of Teams, and then they can chat into Teams that would use Azure Communication Services.
Yep.
So just a bunch of links, but maybe to get you pointed in the right direction and helping you navigate. There's also a very active community of developers for Microsoft Teams and all of Microsoft 365. If you go to pnp.github.io, you can find the landing page for all this. They have regular community calls where you can jump in and see demos of the latest and greatest and maybe even ask a question or two. There are sample galleries for various types of applications, including Teams app samples. So there's a lot of samples here. This is actually getting a remake, but it's the samples are already there. So definitely check that out. And then we also have the tools here, and here's the Teams Yeoman Generator and the Teams Toolkit that we mentioned earlier in the video. So definitely check out the Patterns and Practices community, the PNP community, for all the resources that are here, and join our community.
Thanks for watching. Hope this was really helpful for you. Let us know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe our channel for more updates.